PMQs, Unpacked on Times Radio. Unpacking the politics and cutting through the crossfire.
Order, order. I call Matt Chorley and Tim Shipman.
And that's right, Tim Shipman, political editor of the Sunday Times, joins me now. Afternoon, Tim. What are we expecting today at PMQs?
It's going to be a rip snorter, isn't it? There's so much to go at. I mean, you've got, 10 years in the slammer for lying on your form as you come into the country. Keir Starmer's been very into this whole cladding story, and it sounds like, a wet lettuce has been presented to the people who need all this money. They're not going to pay for people. I think it's over 18 meters high. If your building is 18 meters high, you'll have to borrow the money rather than get given it. There'll be people out there now running tape measures down the outside of their flammable cladding as we speak. Starmer can have a lot of fun with that. There's more cronyism doing the rounds. James Wharton, who helped run Boris Johnson's leadership election, is now the head of a further education enterprise, and he's never had any experience of it. Fill your boots, Keir Starmer.
Well, let's see. We can go to the comments right now. This is Keir Starmer.
To vaccinate the first 4 priority groups by the end of this week. That's a truly amazing achievement. Can the Prime Minister confirm today that the government will extend business rate relief beyond March 31st?
I'm afraid, Mr. Speaker, I'm glad to hear him join in praise of the vaccine rollout, which is indeed, I think, a tribute to the NHS staff and the Army, the volunteers, and many, many others. And on his point about the extension of business rate relief, he knows that this government is committed to supporting businesses and people, livelihoods throughout the pandemic. That is what we will continue to do, but he should wait until the budget for the Chancellor to explain exactly what we're going to do.
OK, well, let's jump in there. First thing you need to know, Times Radio listeners, is that Boris Johnson's hair looks wild today. I'm not sure what that, as a barometer, what that tells us about what's really going on. Do you suspect that Keir Starmer's got a lot of questions to ask and Boris Johnson's going to reply, wait for the budget to all of them, Tim?
Well, if he's silly enough to ask a load of questions about the budget, that's the answer he's going to get. But one imagines that he has a cunning plan, which is going to involve taking Boris Johnson down a pathway that he doesn't want to go down. But so far, it's an easy one to bat off.
OK, well, let's find out. Let's go. Having got nowhere with question 1, let's see if Keir Starmer has more success with question 2.
Mr. Speaker, I think that answer was that the Prime Minister can't give an answer yet. But hundreds of thousands of businesses are affected by this. And the trouble is, Mr. Speaker, that businesses don't work as slowly as the Prime Minister. They need an answer now. As the British Chamber of Commerce says, businesses simply can't wait until the March budget. Let me try another vitally important question for businesses and for millions of working people. Can the Prime Minister confirm today that the furlough scheme will be extended beyond April?
I'll tell you what, if we jump in there, Tim, should we have a guess what Boris Johnson's response is going to be?
For the budget, but really he doesn't even need to wait for the budget. He could have just read the Sunday Times for the last 2 weeks, which has basically said that the furlough scheme will be extended. All the indications coming out of the Treasury is that Rishi Sunak will extend all of these schemes until such point as this crisis is over. Keir Starmer knows that. He's just trying to get him to say it. And Boris Johnson is falling back on the answer that every Prime Minister gives in these circumstances. But clearly there are businesses that are suffering, and this may have a little bit of traction with some of them, but as slightly pointless parliamentary shenanigans go, this is up there, I would say.
I suppose what it does do is it appears to put Keir Starmer on the side of those businesses by saying, come on, you need to confirm it. And it's making Boris Johnson look a bit squirmy, but, wait for the budget. Let's see how Boris Johnson says, wait for the budget.
Speaker, I think most people in this country are aware that we're going through a very serious pandemic in which rates of infection have been steadily brought down thanks to the efforts of the rich people. I think also members of this House are familiar with the notion that in just a few days we will be setting out a roadmap for the way out of this pandemic, a roadmap that I hope the Right Honourable Gentleman and his colleagues will support. Though the support, as we know, tends to be a transitory thing, Mr. Speaker. 1 week we have it, the next week we don't. But he won't have to contain himself for very long.
Keir Starmer.
Well, there we are. That was very much a. You won't have to wait long for me to tell you what is coming or isn't.
It's still 3 weeks away, to be fair to Keir Starmer, and even Boris Johnson's update on the rules is a fortnight away. But it buys him time to get through this week, and let's look forward to next week with the same answer.
Well, let's see what other question Keir Starmer's not going to get an answer to next.
Mr. Speaker, let me let the Prime Minister into a secret. He can take decisions for himself, and he doesn't need to leave everything to the 11th minute. If I were Prime Minister, I'd say to businesses, we'll support you now. We'll protect jobs now. Because the CBI, the Federation of Small Businesses, the Institute of Directors and the British Chamber of Commerce have all said the same thing. They all say, Prime Minister, they can't wait until the budget. The Prime Minister may disagree with me, but he's actually disagreeing with businesses. Why does the Prime Minister think he knows better than British business?
Let's just jump in
Mr.
there,
Speaker,
Tim, because there's something that really resonated. Him having a dig at Boris Johnson saying he can take decisions for himself. He doesn't need to leave everything to the last minute. One of the things that has come up in all of the focus groups where you've done on Times Radio, and I think that's true of the ones that you've done in the Sunday Times as well, is it this sort of sense that comes in sometimes that Boris Johnson's sort of a puppet of other advisors around him, that he's poor Boris Johnson, he's only doing what his advisors tell him, and it doesn't always quite work out properly. And that just feel as if that's something that Keir Starmer's trying to tap into.
Yeah, totally. I mean, very strongly you get that sense of. It was certainly stronger when Dominic Cummings was around, but a lot of people you listen to in focus groups say, well, the scientific advice is this and that, and he has to follow it, and it keeps changing, and it's all rather complicated. So he gets cut quite a lot of slack by the great British public in the sessions I've sat through. But what has also cut through, and Keir Starmer knows this, is there is a general sense that's widely shared, even amongst Johnson's supporters, that he's been pretty slow to make the big moves on lockdowns. I think, most people think he was slow into all three of the lockdowns we've had. And they show, interestingly, a marked reluctance to leave them, compared with what the Leader of the Opposition and some of the business groups are showing. So, ironically, while the business groups probably will applaud Keir Starmer, a lot of the British public is sympathetic to keeping lockdown, until this thing is properly under control.
Yeah, there's one of those things when the Sunday papers are told by Labour sources that they want to present themselves as the party of business. We're now seeing that played out in full effect with Keir Starmer doing just that. Let's go back then and see what Boris Johnson had to say in response.
Speaker, I think that most business people that I've talked to a great many in the last 12 months, would agree that there is no government around the world that has done more to support business, wrapping our arms around business. And actually, I'm delighted to hear this enthusiasm for business from the Labour Party when they stood on a manifesto to destroy capitalism at the last election, and indeed to dismantle the very pharmaceutical industry, Mr. Speaker, that has provided the vaccines on which we now rely. Will he now repudiate that policy, Mr. Speaker?
Well, before we find out about that, there's quite a lot. Once again, international comparisons are allowed when Britain is doing well on those. So, yeah, Britain's done more than any other country to help putting their arms around business. I thought they'd stopped using that phrase, Tim Shipman, because of they put their arms around care homes, and that didn't go terribly well.
Yeah, I think it was care homes that they stopped putting.
Tim, I think Tim Shipman's slightly frozen there. While we try to get Tim back, let's go back to the House of Commons.
Mr. Speaker, we all know what the Prime Minister once said he wanted to do to business. We on these benches would rather listen to businesses. So we've no decision on business rates, no decision on furlough. Let's try another crucial issue. And Prime Minister, no excuse for delaying this time, because this has to be decided before the March budget, and the Prime Minister doesn't need to check with the Chancellor. So will the Prime Minister now commit to extending the evictions ban on residential properties beyond February the 21st?
Right, let me just explain a bit of what went on there. So you had Boris Johnson having a dig at Keir Starmer for standing on a manifesto in 2019, obviously under Jeremy Corbyn, as he described it, which wanted to destroy capitalism, was his description of it. Tim Shipman's back with us now. It is interesting, this line that the Tories have just started to roll out a little bit, that the last Labour manifesto wanted to break up precisely the big pharmaceutical industry, which has done such extraordinary work on the vaccines this year. Do you think that's landing?
Well, it would land better if Keir Starmer had been more sympathetic to the Jeremy Corbyn regime. I mean, you've seen some Corbynistas in recent weeks making similar points. They really don't like these big pharmaceutical firms, even though they're the ones who have sorted out the problem to a large degree. That's a very ideological position that they adopted, and the last leadership of the Labour Party was extremely ideological. Keir Starmer wasn't terribly comfortable with it either. So I think the public can kind of smell that is, while it might be a good debating point, it's probably a bit unfair to park it at the door of Keir Starmer. But he's still, it's a legitimate political tactic, and Starmer has to show why it's not fair. Be interesting to see whether he does or whether he just ignores it.
He may well do, but his response was was to refer to. We all know what the Prime Minister said he wanted to do to business, which of course he was caught at the height of the Brexit discussions. He was caught speaking at an event using the phrase "F business," a word that I won't repeat on the radio because I got into almost as much trouble as Boris Johnson got into at the time.
Yeah, I mean, Boris Johnson has form. I mean, his friends would tell you the context of that was that he was having a pop at the big business groups rather than business per se. But it's it's a simple phrase that has stuck to him. And that's why Keir Starmer thinks there's a bit of an opening here. I think what business wants, according to the people I've spoken to, is a slow, considered emergence from this COVID situation in such a way that we do not go back into a fourth lockdown. And that appears to be the policy that Boris Johnson and his senior ministers have adopted in the last 6 weeks. And at the moment, while I can understand why Keir Starmer wants to go after Boris Johnson on business, there doesn't seem to be a great deal of discontent between the business community and Number 10 at the moment. They seem content that Johnson and Sunak in particular are doing this in a way that they want.
Yeah, and also, I mean, I'd picked up speaking to some business people, although, not everything has gone brilliantly with Brexit, and, there are particular issues with particular sectors or particular ports, whatever. On the whole, it wasn't as bad as all of their, contingency planning may have feared. So, it not as bad as the total catastrophe we expected is, that's progress. That's progress. All right, let's go back to the House of Commons.
Mr. Speaker, I've said repeatedly that what we will do in this government and throughout this pandemic is put our arms around the British people, support them throughout the pandemic, and make sure that people are not unfairly evicted during the pandemic. That is what we will do. What I hope very much, Mr. Speaker, is that we may hear from the right honourable gentleman opposite that he not only has now had a Damascene conversion to the importance of business, but a Damascene conversion to supporting all the government's policies to support business, rather than sniping from the sidelines. Why doesn't he just get behind us and back the government, back us in our efforts to back business and back the British people?
Yes, Starmer.
Back. This all feels terribly familiar to the focus group we had this week. On the one hand, Keir Starmer is, trying to position himself as being more pro-business. Boris Johnson using the line, well, he's just sniping from the sidelines. And that's something that's come up again and again and again. The public seem more willing to give the government the benefit of the doubt. And they think that sometimes that Keir Starmer is just sort of nitpicking rather than doing anything constructive.
Yeah, no, I hear the same things. Going back to what you said earlier, Boris Johnson's hair being wild is generally a sign that he's in a good mood. He doesn't feel he has to present himself in a sort of particularly statesmanlike way. He's happy-go-lucky, like his hair. And so far, this is a session that he's sort of dealing with reasonably happily.
I suppose also, I mean, to the extent that we can read anything into it, Keir Starmer asking for extensions of furlough, extensions of business rate relief and so on. As you point out, the Sunday Times has already reported that's likely to happen. Boris Johnson not even having to really bother engaging with the question because he knows it is coming. He hasn't having to, it's a terrible sort of Westminster phrase, but pitch roll bad news on those fronts. Or, he isn't having to say, well, look, we've always said that furlough is going to come to an end and, this is the opportunity, he's quite happy to just say, wait and see, because good old Rishi's getting his checkbook out again.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, they both know what's coming and they're both pretending they don't. Just as well we're here, Matt.
Good, exactly. And this is why this is such a much better way to experience Prime Minister's questions rather than letting it just all wash over you bafflingly. Right, let's go back to the House of Commons again.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to take lectures from a man who wrote 2 versions of every column he ever wrote as a journalist, who proposed Donald Trump for a Nobel Peace Prize and gave Dominic Cummings a pay rise. Back to the question. Another area where the Prime Minister repeatedly delayed and now changes policy pretty well every day is securing our borders against variants of COVID. Every week the Prime Minister comes here and says we've got one of the toughest regimes in the world. We know his Home Secretary disagrees with him. We know the Health Secretary disagrees with him. Luckily, Mr. Speaker, Oxford University keep track of how tough border restrictions are in every country. They say that there are at least 33 countries around the world which currently have tougher restrictions for the United Kingdom. 33, Prime Minister, including Canada, Denmark, Japan, Israel. There are many others. In fact, they say we're not even in the top bracket of countries for border restrictions. 50 days after we first discovered the South African variant, 50 days. How does the Prime Minister explain that?
Now, I'm going to be fair to Keir Starmer and say I think that was with a packed House of Commons. I think he'd have got a good laugh for that dig at Boris Johnson about. I'm not going to take any lectures from the bloke who wrote 2 versions of every column, suggested Donald Trump win the Nobel Peace Prize and gave Dominic Cummings a pay rise. I mean, it landed completely flat in a House of Commons with almost nobody in it. But that's not, and it seemed relatively spontaneous.
Yeah, no, it was decent. I mean, it would become as news to all the people who sat in newspaper offices waiting for Boris Johnson to file just one column once a week, which he tended to do about 3 hours late. Famously, of course, he wrote 2 columns about Brexit, though even that's slightly misleading because one of them was deliberately bad to convince himself that he'd made the right decision. But yes, it was a decent joke, and you know, all of that stuff resonates with the public. But it has not really got us anywhere today. I mean, what does perhaps cut through is this, you know, Labour know this border stuff works. You know, Starmer's got this good line about schools being shut and the border being open. You know, Boris Johnson keeps saying we've got some of the toughest restrictions in the world. Well, we're not in the top 33. So, you know, there's pushing 200 countries.
You're making one of the bad international comparisons now, Tim. You remember we were allowed to make international comparisons when it comes to business support, where Britain's doing terribly well, or possibly even vaccine rollout, where Britain's also doing terribly well. But you're not allowed to do it if we're not doing terribly well on borders.
No, and this is, you know, in a sense, this is one of those ones I find most frustrating because Labour have got some cut through here. People, you know, I hear in these focus groups, people really, really, really want the border totally shut. You know, some people because they always want the border shut, but even quite a lot of sort of, you know, progressive Remainers who think, you know, we need to just keep all these variants out. You can't do that indefinitely, of course. And you know, it's not that the government is just sitting there completely inept. You know, there are moments where you wonder. But on this, you know, they genuinely don't think you should be shutting the whole place down, and they need to explain why. You know, there are economic reasons for that. There are some health efficacy reasons that actually is how effective can it really be. But you never hear the Prime Minister make that argument, and he sort of allows Starmer in to bash him about the head on borders, and you know, he could be a little bit straighter with the public on this.
Well, particularly because it's one of those things where when the opposition is taking a position which just sounds like common sense. If you don't want something to come into the country, stop anything coming into the country. Sounds like common sense, and so it's a slightly more complicated argument the government has to make in response, and they just don't seem to be making it at the moment. But let's go back to the comments.
Mr. Speaker, thank you, Mr. Speaker. There are some countries in Europe that do not even have a hotel quarantine scheme, such as the one we're putting in on Monday. We have amongst the toughest border regimes anywhere in the world. And people should understand that on a normal day, Mr. Speaker, at this time of year, you could expect about 250,000 people to be arriving in this country. We've got it down to about 20,000, 5,000 of them whom are involved in bringing vital things into this country, such as medicines and food, as we discussed last week, and he agreed that was a good idea, Mr. Speaker. Unless he actually wants to cut this country off from the rest of the world, which I think last week he said he didn't want to do, unless, of course, he's changed his mind again, Mr. Speaker. I think that this policy is measured, it is proportionate, it is getting tougher from Monday. I hope that he supports it.
Keir Starmer.
You know, some European countries don't even have the thing that we don't even have yet.
We don't even have it for 5 more days. It's only been 11 months. How can there be countries that still don't have what we don't have?
Yeah, what we've not got round to do it. There are countries even slower to this than we are. Well, let's see if that has placated Keir Starmer in any fashion.
Mr. Speaker, the truth is this. The Prime Minister is failing to give security to British businesses and he's failing to secure our borders. The Prime Minister often complains that we never put forward constructive proposals. So here's two for him. Support businesses and protect jobs now by extending furlough, business rate relief and VAT cuts for hospitality. And second, secure our borders with a comprehensive hotel quarantine on arrival. No more delays. Will he do it?
Mr. Speaker, we've just announced the quarantine policy, which, as I've said to the House, is amongst the toughest in the world and tougher than most other European countries. Certainly, I'm delighted that he's now supporting business in his latest stunt of bandwagoneering. Not a policy for which he was famous before, Mr. Speaker. But he moves from one side of the other in the debate throughout this crisis. And some people, Mr. Speaker, some people have said that this is a good crisis, Mr. Speaker. Some people have said this is a good crisis. Some people have said that this crisis is a gift that keeps on giving, Mr. Crisis. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, those people sit on the Labour front bench. I think it is disgraceful that they should say those things. I believe this is one of the biggest challenges this country has faced since the Second World War. And thanks to one of the fastest vaccine rollouts anywhere in the world, I believe it is a challenge this country can meet and is meeting. And I believe that of that vaccine rollout programme, this House and this country should be very proud.
Well, there we are. There was probably a bit of politics on display for both sides there. Keir Starmer again calling for things he knows are coming, so that when they come, he can claim credit for them. Extending furlough, business rates relief, and VAT cuts for hospitality. That all seems to be coming down the track in the budget. And then Boris Johnson replying with a stunt of bandwagoneering, an excellent made-up word. Explain what he's talking about there, Tim, with Labour people talking about this being a good crisis.
Yes, Charlie Faulkner, the bigwig under Tony Blair, who's been a bigwig under pretty much every Labour leader since, he made some incautious remarks at, I think, on a Zoom call that he was on recently. Charlie Faulkner works as a barrister when he's not being a very eminent Labour politician. And he was basically saying, it's great, they keep changing the law so all the lawyers can cash in. It's the gift that keeps on giving, which is the kind of stupid, facetious remark that a lot of lawyers make in private. But when those remarks find their way to the front page of newspapers and you're also a politician, it's all a bit embarrassing. I would have put a decent portion of this month's mortgage on Boris Johnson mentioning it at some point. And as you say, bandwagoneering was a nice pre-prepared word. The thing for me that excites me is whether Mr. Crisis is now going to replace Captain Hindsight as his preferred phrase for Keir Starmer.
I think he was so keen to get out the crisis. It's a good crisis gambit. Yeah, he was trying to say Mr. Speaker, and it became Mr. Crisis. But maybe this is a Mr. Crisis, a thing that'll stick. Now, I should point out, unusually, we've still got loads of questions, but the pair of them were much pithier today.
Yeah, this is we're not normally. We normally do about 3 or 4 more minutes with these guys.
Yeah, because they're still blathering on. So it does mean the joy of joys. It does mean we've got time before the news break for Ian Blackford. So now let's hear from the SNP's leader in Westminster.
1.3 million children under 5 are living in poverty in the United Kingdom. This is a truly shocking figure that should make this Tory government utterly ashamed. The Scottish National Party has repeatedly called for a financial package to boost household incomes and reverse this Tory child poverty crisis. The Prime Minister has the power to tackle child poverty right now by making the £20 uplift to universal credit permanent and by extending it to legacy benefits. The Tory government's been stalling on this for months. Will the Prime Minister finally act, or will he leave millions of children out in the cold?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think that whole house in this country should be proud of the way we've tried to look after people, the poorest and neediest families throughout the country, not just with universal credit, which the party opposite would actually abolish, Mr. Speaker, but by helping vulnerable people with their food and their heating bills, the £170 million winter grant scheme, looking after people with the free school meal vouchers. And as I've said before, Mr. Speaker, we all put our arms around the people of this entire country throughout the pandemic.
We could probably file that away again, Tim, as people asking for things ahead of the budget, which they can either take credit for or afterwards demand to know why they weren't listened to.
Well, it suggests that Ian Blackford's been reading the Times, because the Times suggested that Boris Johnson is going to get Rishi Sunak to extend the universal credit uplift for 6 months. Lots of people have been pushing for it to be extended for a year. The Treasury, as is their way, have been pushing to not spend any money. Rishi Sunak wanted a one-off payment. He's been overruled. People who are well plugged in have written that it'll be 6 months, and Ian Blackford's said, right, I'll ask for that then. Great.
And what are you hearing, Tim, in terms of, because what is it now, 3 weeks until the budget? What is the mood in the Treasury like? Is Rishi Sunak's become the most popular man in Britain in the last 12 months? He's only been in the job 12 months, I think, sort of this week or next week. How is his current prospects? Has he got tough decisions to make, or is he going to put them off again?
I think for the most part, he'll be putting them off again. I think this government is actually rather less at war with itself than it was a few months ago. Traditionally, the Treasury wants not to spend any money, and Downing Street wants to spend all the money. And you've seen rows over, furloughing. You've seen rows over COVID support, and basically, Sunak has got some kind of arrangement with Boris Johnson. They've been having a lot of dinners together, whereby he'll cough up the money now for a few more months. The schemes that Keir Starmer was asking about will get extended. And then they'll put in place a sort of successor regime with lots of stuff to boost jobs and skills and all that kind of thing. But essentially that furlough money will peel away. They're not going to keep paying everybody's wages forever. And they realise they'll have some kind of unemployment crisis. But there's basically an agreement. You come slowly out of the lockdown, you support people for the time being, and then you put in place something else which comes in, either in the summer or the autumn, that looks a little bit different. Rishi Sunak will probably make a few token efforts to claw back some money. There'll be a little, he'll be able to say to the markets, look, I'm doing a tiny bit of consolidation here, but you're not going to see massive tax rises in the budget. All that stuff's for later in the year.
Yeah, and we'll be able to hear that here on Times Radio on March the 3rd when Rishi Sunak sets out his budget. The main takeaway from today is that everyone seems to read the Times and the Sunday Times. Keir Starmer seems to have just read out lots of things he's read in the Sunday Times, and then Ian Blackford did the Times. So if you want to read more of what's going to happen in politics from Tim Shipman, then you also just need to get yourself a Times subscription. Go to thetimes.co.uk, click on anything you like the look of, and there's a bonus right now. You can get your first month for free. I assume, though, that Keir Starmer's long been a subscriber.